Hello and welcome to another episode of the Testing Peers podcast. With me tonight, I've got Simon Pryor.
Hello.
Russell Craxford.
Hi.
And David Maynard.
Hello.
And I'm Chris Armstrong. And if you haven't actually listened to us before, we are four friends, slack-crossed lovers, if you will, lovers of test and leadership and agility and good things like that, especially quality things. We are really pleased to have a sponsor in Saffron QA who have been a really supportive bunch for us. They're a recruitment firm exclusively for the software testing and QA market. More information can be found on them in the show notes. Today we're going to be talking about exploratory testing. And I believe before we go into that, Simon's got some interesting things for us to talk about.
Yeah, I've had to think about some stuff. And I remember there was something we talked about on very early episodes, which I'm sure our listeners are dying to find out more about. And given it was Christmas, I remember Mr. Maynard mentioned that his potatoes would be ready for Christmas. So, David, how were they?
They were very nice. In fact, I had some more this evening. So, yes, I had to dig them up a little bit early because of blight, but I doubled the amount that I planted and they are still going strong. So they are very tasty and very good for mashing, roasting and everything else. So, yeah, they've done very well.
Good. Well, I was just going to ask about the potatoes. I have got a second banter topic, don't worry. And it is kind of linked to the exploratory testing. I certainly know I am a person that gets very curious when we get a new device or a new toy or something in the house for the kids. I like to try and explore it and try and break it as much as possible. What kind of things have you broken through your curiosity and exploring of stuff in the past? I know for one thing that I do very regularly is pens. I like to break the clip thing off the top just because I'm brute forcing it. Is there anything particularly you remember that might not have been yours that you've broken because you've been so curious to wonder how it works?
I can tell you two stories. I'll tell you the first one. I had a kit car, so I decided to do some work on it, as you do, and not really an expert on cars. That's why I bought a kit car, to kind of learn about it and so on. So I took the engine out, as you do with a car, and you don't know really what that is. And when I put it back in, didn't quite understand how gears and things like that worked, and the clutch and things. So I just rammed it back in, breaking and bending the clutch and costing myself an extra couple of grand just to try and get that repaired by an expert later. Playing with expensive toys can be quite expensive. So that's one. The other one's probably more fun. When I was a child, I used to love taking to bits my cot. So I would literally use like my fingernails and things and dismantle it whilst I was on the inside of it. And on several occasions, my parents ran in to find me in a pile of bits and bobs from a cot that had fallen on top of me as I'd taken it apart. They ended up super gluing the screws and things in to stop me from taking it apart.
How old were you at that point?
Very young. So I've always been the sort of person who likes taking things apart and trying to break them.
How did you get the screws out?
I don't actually know. My parents never figured it out.
I'm presuming at that time in the past they were toweling nappies with safety pins, so I'm presuming it's a safety pin.
I have no idea, but yeah, I've always been a fan of things like the A-Team where you put things together and make crazy contraptions. And I think anywhere you explore and take things apart, it's kind of what I love doing. So yeah, like Simon said, pens easy peasy, but for me, it's cars at the moment. Yeah, as a baby, I did cots and all sorts. Never mind. Go on, Dave.
I can't remember actually breaking anything specifically. Again, pens, I play with them all the time, and so therefore they do break in my fingers. But often when things are at the end of life, I like taking them apart. So especially things like one of the kids' digital cameras broke or whatever. So taking that apart to seeing how it works and see what's inside it. I do enjoy it, that sort of thing. Not so much just to see if I can fix it, but also just to see how it works.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm a bit stupid. So
You didn't say it.
So the first time we ever lived in a house where we had to provide white goods, so like fridges and that sort of thing, we bought a second-hand washing machine. Well, it's a washer-dryer, no less. Very fancy. One day, our washer-dryer stopped working, and then there was stuff stuck in it. Not being the most sensible person, I didn't realise that there's a way of draining a washer dryer, or even like there's the special pulley bit to open the door, like the special sort of safety latch. So Chris, this guy, I used an axe and I forced the door open.
An axe?
And completely broke it. I mean, I didn't actually smash it. I will leave the woodsman work to David. What I would say is it's not the greatest idea, but actually an axe, you get quite a good bit of leverage, and I managed to force the door open. I rescued all the clothes. I flooded my kitchen. That was rendered a little bit broken. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that, folks. Please.
There's an analogy here about the right tool for the right job, isn't there?
It did the job. Don't get me wrong. I released the clothes that I
It
wanted.
did, but with consequence.
Mentally, I had already sort of said goodbye to the washer dryer because it stopped working.
Did you not think to look on Google?
Do you know, I didn't. And do you know why?
You didn't have it.
Pre-Google.
Pre-Google.
It's not pre-Google. It would have been
Ask
like
Jeeves.
about 2012 maybe.
Okay.
So why didn't you? You're still on dial-up.
No, I had the broadband. It didn't occur to me. I just thought it's an old washer dryer. I don't know how you get them open. Like normally, like when they stop, they just sort of self-drain, do these things. Obviously, it's broken. I'll just go and take the stuff out I need to. Get the old axe. Right.
Can you confirm you did turn the plug off at the wall and things like that first before you start going out with an axe?
I'm stupid. I don't have a death wish.
Okay.
Is that part of exuberance of youth?
It's only 8 years ago. He's not a child.
I was 29.
He looks 12, but he's not really 12.
No, but inexperience, and just because he was saying it's the first time that you got into house, and you learn from experience, which is the whole exploratory testing.
Yeah.
So therefore,
Yeah, absolutely.
I grew up in a house that wasn't ours, so we didn't have practical things to do in the house because my dad is a vicar, and so we had people come in to fix things for us. So we never had to do any of that stuff. We also never had to decorate a house, and everything was bland, as you can imagine. I was inquisitive about lots of things, facts and figures, and loads of things. But actually physically taking apart mechanical things and putting them back together again didn't really appeal to me. I was much more into like the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan.
I was thinking more Hulk smash type thing, but yeah.
well, that's why you went into computer games at the end of the day, isn't it?
Well, yes. Anyway, we should probably move on, right?
I do kind of get what you're saying, actually, because I'm very much the same. I like the idea of taking things apart and fixing them, but as soon as I get to that point, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing now. And you're right, David, there is Google, and I have done that with YouTube for a few things, like fixing our tumble dryer and whatever else, but it's not.
I fixed a lot of things since. This was the only thing that I did. That was
I don't even own an axe.
I've got two.
Have you?
2 axes, 2 saws. I've got a crowbar. I've got I've got all the cool tools these days.
All the tools, just doesn't know how to use them.
Just out of interest, if you've got a crowbar as well as an axe, why did you use the axe, not the crowbar?
That is a very good point.
I didn't have the crowbar in those days. I had to upgrade when I was taking apart our decking.
It's all part of the tester's toolbox, isn't it? Having the right tools at the right time. I think there's definitely a link here.
It's just a Home Alone thing.
So exploratory testing. We were sort of testing things to destruction there a little bit.
What is, if you were going to give me a one sentence of what exploratory testing is, what would you actually give it to me as?
Very good question,
That's a
Chris.
good question.
Thank you. I guess it's the process of designing, executing, and learning from tests in a very rapid succession, where one test informs the next test, and that you continuously progress your work rather than formulating tests and waiting to learn.
I would definitely agree with the loop thing of it's a continuous learning exercise as you move around the system. And it's learning, documenting, and changing paths due to how you've discovered or what you've discovered from your learning.
I would say that it's basically unscripted and using your heuristics and your previous knowledge as to what areas to actually look into. So you learn as you're going through, but also use prior knowledge coming into it to hone your skills as to highlight those areas. But however, it isn't just looking at the whole thing. We compartmentalize it into time-boxed sections so that we can spend our time really delving into that particular area to understand it fully.
Yeah, that's the more structured side of it, isn't it? It's where you kind of go from exploratory in its rawest sense into kind of a more of a session-based or a time-box-based way of managing exploratory sessions in order to do high-level, I hate the word, coverage of your product or area of risk even. But it's kind of a way of managing that.
It's a way of differentiating between exploring and ad hoc testing, isn't it? Because you've got time boxing, you've got heuristics perhaps, you've got a mission or a goal or something you're trying to achieve, coverage or learning information or whatever. Those things add a little bit of structure, but not in the scripted sense.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people will say, oh, no, I'm just exploring the product, I'm just doing these things.
Yeah, I have a pet peeve that
Muddies the water.
that's not really exploratory, that's more ad hoc testing. And it can add value. There's no question of that. But to me, there is more of a structure. There is a purpose to what you're doing with exploratory. Be it time boxed or not, you generally have a design, a mission, a purpose, a thing to do. And then obviously you execute that, you explore that, you do that, you try that, and then you use what you learn from that for the next part. And I think, that's what makes it slightly different from ad hoc in my view, where
Absolutely.
your ad hoc could be something entirely different.
I think that's sometimes where exploratory testing gets I won't say bad rep, because I don't think it does have a bad rep, but it's misunderstood, because you'll hear teams talking about, and I've experienced this recently, where they're like, oh yeah, we finish all our test cases and then we play with the system for a bit, we do some exploratory testing. And it's like, that's not exploratory testing. If you show me what you're doing, that's not exploratory testing. That, as you say, Russell, it's ad hoc. I'm just going to play with the system, run a few things, see if it works. If it works, I'm happy. The business hear the term exploratory testing and then assume that's exploratory testing, and then they don't really understand the concepts, and they're not willing to grant any time to it. So it's just seen as an ad hoc thing you'll do at the end of the software project. Whereas when you start introducing it as we want to change the way we're doing things to include more exploratory testing, like, well, no, we can't do more of that, because that's just that little bit of thing you do at the end. So it is definitely misunderstood. But in the times when I have used it, and it is limited in when I've used it, I'm a very big advocate of exploratory testing, but I've only actually physically done it myself a handful of times, but I have encouraged teams to learn and perform it. I've seen great value, and I've seen defects found that standard test cases rarely do.
There is sometimes a mindset change in companies, but not just companies, I think testers as well. Sometimes it can misunderstand it and see it as ad hoc testing and don't actually fully understand it. Part of the selling to people that don't understand it, especially when they're used to writing scripts and stuff, there have been times when we don't have, all the requirements might change, and so therefore we can't write the scripts up front because we don't quite know how it's going to work. So therefore we'll write the steps we're doing as we're doing the testing, and it'll be exploratory testing. And then selling them, actually the testing isn't going to take any longer, because you're going to end up with the same evidence. You're going to find out what the testing was, you're going to find out all the bugs and whatever. The only difference is you haven't got that upfront scripts that you're going to be looking at and assessing and checking that you're doing. We can give you the areas we're going to look at and go into detail into that as to how much time we're going to put on each. But actually the end result will be exactly the same as with whatever testing methodology. It's just a lot easier because those requirements aren't there in the beginning. And once they got their head around that, they went, oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, brilliant. Go ahead. Yeah. And actually we did it successfully. They were very happy with the result. And that's a big thing that I try and do, is say, we will own, don't dictate to us what testing methodology or whatever we use for this particular project. We will choose the best methodology. You will end up with the same. You will end up with results. You will end up with pass and fail, or whatever criteria you want at the end. Let us own that, and we'll give you confidence that we know what we're doing. But actually names, methodologies, they're all much of the muchness, as long as the client gets what they want at the end.
Yeah. Does it work?
Yes.
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge I've had, and I've mentioned this before on the pod, is regulators and the expectations from a regulator, especially one that's quite involved in the testing, is looking for, where's your test plan? Where's your test cases? Can I look at your test cases? Have you marked them all as pass or fail, et cetera, et cetera?
I went visiting gov.uk today, as I like to peruse these things every once in a while. And they have a whole section on exploratory testing. And they are kind of a regulatory force, if you like. And their reasons that we do exploratory testing was to detect subtle or complex bugs in the system that scripted testing would not, and also to provide user-oriented feedback to the team. And those two are things I think we probably would agree with, but also we wouldn't necessarily constrain exploratory testing to. But the fact that even the government would use exploratory testing suggests to me that regulators who don't are behind the times a little bit. And I've done modern agile trainings. It was in modern times, I'm not saying it was modern agile, where their introduction as to what testing should be was the triangle of testing. They've said, so you have all of these unit tests, super. Lots of integration tests in the middle, and then they've got the top, which is UI, automation, all of it. You automate everything. And then just a little cloud with exploratory.
Cloud on the top.
Just a little cloud on the top.
The cloud gets bigger depending on who draws the diagram, right?
It shows there is a misunderstanding of what exploratory testing is from all fronts. The trainers, like Simon said, some of the regulators, definitely some of the companies that are paying for people who will be doing testing, and even people in testing and engineering. Yeah. We just don't have it. And there's some wonderful resources out there, aren't there, for like explaining what it is, and wonderful tools.
Definitely. Hundreds.
Yeah, there are. There definitely is. Yeah, I mean, just looking at the books, there's James Whittaker's book and Elizabeth Hendrickson's book are the two books that I would always recommend.
What are they called, Simon?
Well, James Whittaker's is Exploratory Software Testing, tips, tricks, tools, and techniques to guide your test design. I have it right here. And then Explore It by Elizabeth Hendrickson is on my birthday wish list. So hopefully.
Very good book. I thoroughly recommend it. I would lend it to you if I could, but I can't. There's lots online you can find from Elizabeth about the subject. Thoroughly recommend reading anything she's written on that subject. It is interesting what you're kind of saying about regulatory authorities and government there as well. There's subsets of people that understand and don't understand it across everywhere. I've worked at different companies, and in the same company, there's people that love it, embrace it, and there's areas and teams that think it's the devil. There's people that think it's wonderful and should be at the end as an additional thing. And there's people, probably like myself, who prescribe it as almost the first thing. And automation and other things follow it, and you learn from what you do that then informs your scripted tests. And that's what, to me, automation is. It's a scripted test that you run time and time again. There's different schools, and it is interesting to see the variety of those schools. I have to say, from I think Chris's point about ad hoc confusion to the exploratory confusion, it does cause a disservice to kind of what exploratory testing is. And I think exploratory testing isn't easy because I think David made the point. It's about your skills, it's heuristics, it's your knowledge. It plays an incredibly important part. But not only do you need those skills, it helps you build those skills. There's far more value in doing that than executing a script. I think there's a lot of value in creating scripts, understanding what you need to do and analyzing things. But the execution part of following a plan, that's kind of why we built machines. Like any machine ever, it will only look for what you tell it. So you get people to follow scripts, they will only see what you ask them to look for. Explorers have generally an open view of the world and look at it and see what's around them as entirety, which means you get a much more broader understanding what the product does do or doesn't do. You get much more detailed feedback that allows you to spot far more a range in problems or risks.
I feel that exploratory testing has a bad press because of that misconception of exactly what it is and misunderstanding. And I think it's bad. I really feel sorry for that methodology because it is so valuable. There are so many times when I've followed scripted things and I want to go down that route, but I can't because the script is saying I have to do this. Why can't I if it says put in a name, I go, well, why don't I put a character in? There isn't that flexibility in order to do that. And so I generally would do just because, or I'd try it again with a special character. If I was following the letter of the project or whatever, I shouldn't really be doing that. But it's so frustrating as a tester to have to just follow scripts.
You're not really being a tester at that point.
No, you're not.
You're right. The argument there is that you've been a tester before by creating and identifying all the scripts you need to run. But you're right. As soon as you start executing scripts, you're thinking of new scenarios that you've not already thought of. You're exploring the system within the constraints of the scripted tests. You're in your head, you're still exploring the system and you're thinking of more cases as you go along. The problem there comes that you're then effectively adding extra test cases that you've got to go back and write and document and everything else.
And go through the approval process.
We don't want to go down the line of let's talk about test cases and automation today, but
agreed.
Russell said these things can inform those things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Being stimulated as a tester is important, and getting those ideas, again, is really important. If we don't have those things, then we are just doing a mind-numbing, essentially like data entry type job. And then we don't feel like we're a skill. We don't feel like we're a craft. We're certainly not being creative.
Yeah.
There are things that are in exploratory testing that require a very different skill to some of the other aspects of testing. Some of those things are around communication because one of the things we've talked about a lot is that justifying what exploratory testing is to other people who don't understand it. It's not just educating what it is, but also the value of it, what we have achieved with this time. All of those things are things we need to have the ability to do, but there's also, is exploratory testing a solo game? Is it a team game? Can we do it as a mob? Can we do it or an ensemble or whatever?
You just made me think about something sort of in the development sort of world. There's something about rapid feedback. You want build times, you want everything to be short, you want to find it fails fast, you want to learn these things. Exploratory testing is the equivalent for testing. You don't write a test script, wait for 3 reviews, 6 people, then 2 days later or 2 weeks later execute it. That learning time is so slow. You want to do that rapidly and fast. And that's what exploratory testing allows. It allows rapid learning and feedback, which is generally perceived across everything, in my opinion, to be a much more productive way of delivering software. Yeah. And guess what? It's more productive delivering quality software as well as it is of lines of code or requirements or feedback from users. You don't want a user to give you feedback today and get the feedback in 6 weeks' time. You want it now so you can action about it. And that's exploratory testing.
You're right, absolutely. And that's the key selling point of exploratory testing, that I would throw away all the manual test cases that my team spend writing for weeks before they start executing. If we could say, right, okay, you give us the build, we will start exploratory testing now, and we'll do however many weeks of time box sessions on different areas of the system, and we'll get you the feedback a lot quicker than we do if we spend 3 weeks prepping test cases. But there isn't appetite to change things in that drastic a measure. So it's trying to work out how we get there.
Is there an appetite, or do you think there's a fear because it's like an unknown, or it isn't recognised in the same way? It's not so easy to do KPIs or metrics and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that. There's percentage test case coverage, how many test cases have passed, failed, etc., defects, etc., etc. It all becomes a little bit more blurry. But one of the big positives with exploratory testing is you're documenting as you're exploring, and you've got that evidence, as David said earlier, just as you would do if you run a scripted test. You just haven't got a step guide against it beforehand. You're writing it as you go. There is an argument there that you could effectively write the scripts as you're exploring, which seems a bit tedious. There is a way around it that way.
There's the infographic by Dan Ashby, right, with the information, and then you explore the knowns, the unknown knowns, the unknown unknowns, and then the way all of that, those sorts of bits, they inform scripted testing or automated testing or other bits and bobs as you go. And so then you can explore deeper because that other stuff's taken care of with scripts and stuff.
Yeah, and the best way I've seen exploratory testing documented was through a mind map, and they built the mind map out further and further as they explored the system, and they highlighted in red where defects were found within that mind map, and then they were able to go back and say how they reproduced those defects. That's the biggest thing I've had as well in the past of teams questioning exploratory testing was, well, you found that defect. How are we going to reproduce it next cycle? How are you going to ensure that you then test that every time we do a cycle going forward?
Sometimes when you're raising bugs, you're asked to find a method of reproduction, though, just as default. So
steps to reproduce.
Then it's the question of, can you make sure you add that test case to our regression pack for the next cycle? Because you've now found that defect.
That's a different argument about whether you need to have a test case for a bug as well.
Yeah, I know.
It's a whole different thing. Or automation, but yeah.
That was one of the arguments I had when I tried to push exploratory testing was, well, how are we going to have that evidence for next time? Because you've done exploratory testing, they're thinking of it as an ad hoc method.
Yeah, there's nothing stopping you, once you've learned of a problem, to do anything you want with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't matter how you found it. You can do any options once you figured it out. But yeah, I get you, the resistance that people get.
Going back to the original point that Chris said, I think there is sometimes they want evidence. They want evidence of scripting and what they're putting their money towards, whether that's a client or whether that's the internal project or whatever. They want to see evidence, which is quite a bizarre thing considering developers are given a requirement and free to write the code for whatever they're doing, but testers have to prove that they are capable of actually doing it. It is, I think, sometimes a bit of a mind shift to allow testers, again, that flexibility. Just as I'm saying, allow testers to use the best tools, and you will see the results however you want to.
It very much goes into Simon's kind of challenges that I think he's seen in his past as well, which is changing to a more of exploratory focused strategy requires a change of how you record testing, how you demonstrate the value of testing. It's not just changing the technique, it influences reporting mechanisms and all sorts of different things. Because you're no longer doing the test case, you can't measure test case completed. If you're doing Agile and Scrum and some of these other processes, it's probably good that you actually get away from some of those sort of metrics and KPIs. That's a big change for project managers, for test managers in some cases, for testers, for developers, for other people, stakeholders.
It may also mean a change of personnel in some cases, because the testers you've got in the team may not have the right skill sets for exploratory testing. They can probably be taught, but would they be able to drop scripted tests and pick up exploratory straight away? Probably not.
No, my experience is no. One of my last places of work, I introduced what I would say was exploratory-based testing as the core testing methodology, how we did testing. We did automation regression from that as well, but that was the main method of testing. We stopped scripting, which was generally the perceived way. We had to have a library of scripts. We could use those scripts to learn about the product in the future and so on. Some testers found that very hard to go away from, but that means I haven't got a script to find out how this worked before. They found it very hard to think, no, but you do have the product help guide. If you need to know how it works, that's designed to tell you that. And you do have the automation scripts. They actually go through the system. And actually, you have your heuristics, your brains, your experience, your knowledge. Trust it. If it looks off, probably is. And it was very hard for some to grasp that change. I found it easier, oddly, for management to grasp it than I did for the actual testers and the teams to grasp it fully. Some loved it, some resisted, some went in different tangents. So, like taking notes and different techniques and different things of doing that.
It sounds like, to me, the option then to encourage that would be to do pair exploratory testing or to do multiple people to get them.
Doing it multiple people is definitely a good thing. Did you ever have a look on Ministry of Testing Essentials? Micah Brinkoff did a talk on exploratory testing, and she said, like, while the value of her testing is important, she inherently has biases. She inherently has all of these ways of working, the way she approaches these things. And actually, you encourage other people to do these things, regardless of whether their title says tester or delivery manager or group lead or whatever any of us are being called, that you will bring something different to the table. And actually doing those things together means you learn together, you explore together, you get a better appreciation of the whole thing. So that's why things like mobs can be successful. We used to do them at my old company for major releases, where all the testers, regardless of what team or what product you've been working on, would do it. And we broadened that out to the wider company at a later date. But we all learnt stuff about our own products that none of us would have known otherwise. Because there's nothing like a demo on a sprint that would necessarily show those things. Because I don't know about you, but I don't really find demoing tests, unless they're automated, very easy to do at the end of a sprint.
I don't find them that engaging, generally speaking.
Well, no, it's often demos aren't very engaging, unfortunately.
Another subject for another day.
So, yeah, but my point was finding a way to show those things, like the note-taking things, the capture. There are some tools that can help or indeed restrict these things. I think Simon's new friend, other Simon,
Mr. Tomes.
Test Buddy. Yeah,
it's a great tool.
A lot of us, when we look more deeply into what exploratory testing is, we'll discover that a lot of things we have been doing have been exploratory testing without us necessarily having formed
labeled it. Yeah,
we might have said, "Oh, I've got an hour. I need to check the login page, and so I'm just going to start doing some little things on that. I've got some knowledge, some prior knowledge of things. I know how it should work, and I've done those things. That isn't necessarily ad hoc because it's still targeted, it's still time boxed, and I've still got knowledge that I'm informing those things. And while I think I would say I've never explicitly written a charter and done these things, when I am testing, not using a script, I take notes. I have a targeted thing. I love using heuristics.
You're right. And I go back when I was more actively involved in testing. And one of the first things I'd always do when I got a build of something or a feature was, I'm going to spend a couple of hours learning the system now. I'm going to use it and explore it. You give yourself a couple of hours. You time box yourself. I'm going to do this. And then you end up writing your scripts on the back of what you've learned through that couple of hours. So you may not be writing charters and following a direct path that you've set out as part of the charter, but you are exploring it in a not in an ad hoc way, in a more focused way than you would have done if you're just sort of playing with the system.
I have a confession. In my testing career, I wrote scripted testing. I did that for about a year. After that, I didn't do any scripts.
Wow.
I moved away from that model very, very quickly.
That's a discussion for another day because I've got some very different stories.
Yeah.
Let's quickly move on before Simon tells us more sad story.
Ultimately, all I'm trying to say is it can be done. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying there's definitely ways to getting there. There's journeys to be gone on, but it is possible to definitely have a very much exploratory operated model. That doesn't mean scripted isn't part of it. It doesn't mean all these other things aren't part of it. But yes, I've talked enough. We have talked enough. It is probably time to say goodbye and say thank you very much for listening to us once again. We're glad that you've hopefully enjoyed this episode. And if you have enjoyed it, please feel free to reach out to us and give us some feedback. We do love feedback. And as you can see, we do love the topic of exploratory testing. You can reach us at contactus@testingpeers.com via our Twitter handle, testingpeers, via LinkedIn, testingpeers. Go on, Chris, help me out here. Instagram, there we go. I'm sure at some point in this millennium we'll have a TikTok as well. Oh yeah, and Patreon. And if you can think of another channel we haven't monopolized yet, feel free also to let us know. Ideally by one of the other channels that we do. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.